Alright guys, welcome back for another episode. If you're new here, my name's Dave and I've been exploring the outdoors and truck camping for many years now, and I've picked up a few lessons along the way that really changed how I camp. So I wanted to share what I've learned from truck camping in the UK to help you be more comfortable, avoid common mistakes and get the most out of your next truck camping adventure. So one of the biggest mistakes that I made early on was how I was going to deal with wet weather in the UK whilst I was truck camping, and I thought the logical answer was to get myself a side awning. And whilst that works on paper, it doesn't in theory work very well in the UK, particularly in the wet and windy weather that we get. And the answer is really obvious as to why it doesn't work, and the more I think about it, I'm not quite sure how I overlooked it at the beginning. But this space here is not my base for truck camping. It's at the back of the truck. And when you start to think about it, for every time it rains in the UK whilst you're truck camping, you get your awning out thinking, I'll sit under here and stay dry. You've got to move to the back of the truck bed, constantly getting your gear out and moving it under there, and all that's going to do is soak the back of the truck bed and get you soaked as well. And then when you need to bring your gear back and forth between the truck bed and underneath your awning and it's pouring down with rain, all you do is turn this into a big muddy mess, and it just makes your truck camping experience less enjoyable and your base camp more difficult to move around. So even on a day like this when I'm trying to film, I'm going to have to put the awning down because it's far too windy for it and it just wants to lift up off the ground. Even when you stake these in, it's not reliable and you just risk damaging the awnings. So my advice is, if it's wet and windy, just don't put it out. It's going to be more hassle than it's worth. And I'll give you a couple of options of how you can deal with wet and windy weather when you're camping in the back of your truck bed. So in terms of solutions, if you do want an awning to cover the rear of your truck bed to keep the rain and the wind out, have a little look at a rear mounted awning. But you are going to need to consider is the canopy of the truck bed going to interfere with the awning being opening, so you're going to have to think about where and how high you mount that. And then your other options are going to be a side mounted awning, but a bit of a different style. You're going to need to look at a batwing style, so it will come out at the side but it'll come right round and cover the back of your truck bed, so it still gives you a little bit of shelter on the side and you can walk between the two. But if you don't fancy going down that route, you want to keep your setup nice and simple, all I do to deal with the rain and the wind is park my truck nose into the direction that the wind and the rain is blowing, and I'll utilise the canopy as a bit of a shield to cover the back of the truck bed here, where I can still cook and get in and out and keep relatively dry. It just stops that rain driving into the back of the truck bed and getting everything wet. So one of the next lessons I learned was, it's one thing keeping the truck bed dry from the rain, but what do you do about keeping it dry and clean from the likes of your muddy boots and your wet clothes? So the best way I find to be able to keep the back of the truck bed nice and clean and dry is just deal with your wet clothes and your muddy boots at the door. So I tend to store wet and muddy boots just underneath my tent box. But if you haven't got anything on top of your truck that you can store your boots underneath, I'd recommend just using a storage box or a dry bag, and then you can just leave your muddy and wet boots on top of your truck bed and you can access them just by standing on the tailgate, and that way they're nice and dry for when it comes to getting out of the truck next. Obviously, if you're going to be in and out of the truck quite a few times, I just tend to tuck my wellies or my boots underneath the tailgate, and that just keeps them dry whilst that's down in case it's pouring down. And then if you do want to close the tailgate, I just tuck them underneath the back of the truck bed, and then I can still get in and close the tailgate, and then when I need them I can just reach under and I've got some nice dry boots. And the same applies really for any wet gear that you've got on. If you're not going to be using it for the rest of your trip, I just put it in a dry bag and leave it in the front of the truck. But if you have got a wet jacket that you want to be drying off and using again the next day, I've got a simple trick where you can leave your wet jacket outside regardless of the elements, and it'll still dry and drain so it's ready for you to put on the next day. All you need to do is take your wet jacket and a magnet that's got one of these hooks attached to it, thread that through the hook on your jacket, get yourself a dry bag, and then just place your jacket inside your dry bag, grab the top of your magnet. All you need to do is attach the magnet to the side of your truck, and that will allow the jacket to stay dry if it rains, and it also allows any water to drain out that's been on the jacket, and you'll find in the morning that's pretty much dry. One of the biggest lessons that I had was the realisation that one cooking setup doesn't work in the UK. Different weather conditions and different locations require different setups, and what I found was having multiple options allowed me to adapt to different situations without forcing one setup to work. So I've actually got 3 different cooking options I've got my main burner, which I use when I've got plenty of space, it's nice and dry, I'm not in a rush. My second option is my jet boil, and that's really handy because it's quick and efficient. I can cook in the back of the truck, and it's ideal for bad weather conditions as well. Plus it's got the advantage of packing down nice and neat. I can stow it in a rucksack and take that with me on one of my adventures. And my third option, when the conditions and location allow, is just my campfire and grill set, because who doesn't like to cook outdoors over an open flame? And of course in the UK, a lot of campsites don't allow open fires on the ground, so this has got the advantage of being raised up off the ground. So I actually found the real benefit wasn't actually the gear itself, it was more the choice that it offered. So when it was wet and it was windy, I could cook inside the truck or on the back of the tailgate. When the conditions allowed, I could move more outside, and I wasn't actually forced to stand there in the rain and cook food. Having multiple cooking options in the UK is a bit of a must. That flexibility is often better than just having one single setup. Another lesson that I've learnt over the years is the difference in power consumption during the winter and that in the summer months. So in the UK summer months, I've learned that I can get away with using one of my smaller power banks. This is the Jackery 300 Plus, and if I pair that with a solar panel, I'm pretty much able to run my fridge, charge my devices such as my phone, my camera and my laptop without worrying too much about the power, because I know that in the summer months this panel will get enough solar energy to keep this pretty much topped up, even with the fridge running 24/7, so don't need to worry about that too much. But in the winter months, that's a completely different story. My power consumption goes up quite significantly, and I can't rely on a small power bank or a solar panel to keep those devices running. So I know that in the winter I'm going to be using my electric heater to keep the back of the truck bed warm. I run the kettle a lot more just to be making warm drinks, and I also think it's good to be able to sit in the back of the truck bed and watch a movie on a cold and wet winter's night, so I find that I'm charging the laptop a little bit more than I would do. Unfortunately, during the winter months I couldn't rely upon the solar panel too much. It's more of a bonus than anything else. The weather's far too unpredictable and the skies are far too grey to be relying upon solar energy to keep everything topped up. So for the winter months then, and my longer trips, I always bring with me my Jackery 1000. That way you haven't got to worry about what the weather's doing. Another sort of lesson I've learned for saving power over the years is your mobile phones and your head torches and your small devices, you can just charge them on these smaller power banks. It just means that your main power stations aren't being drained by those tiny and constant loads, and you can use them for powering bigger things like your fridge or your electric heater. So it's great to be able to have all this power in the back of your truck bed, but a big key to making this successful is placing it somewhere where it's accessible and usable. Now for me, I place these at the back or the side of the truck bed, and it just means I can tie them down so they're not bouncing around too much. But that obviously affects accessibility then, and I'm often to climb in and out of the truck bed to be able to turn them on and connect different devices. So my solution to that was just getting one of these small and compact travel leads. Really good, just packed down, nice and small, and you get about 1.5 meters worth of cable on them. There's 2 plugs with it. You've also got 2 USB ports and 1 USB-C as well. It even comes with a retractable USB-C cable, so that's really handy. And what I tend to do is just plug this into one of the ports on the Jackery, and then I run the cable all the way down to the rear of the truck bed, and that just means I don't need to be constantly climbing in and out of the back of the truck bed to connect other devices. And then to make things even easier, if you've got a power bank like mine which comes with an app, you can just use that to turn your devices on and off. So the lesson that I learned there was to plan my power usage around the seasons and just make these as accessible as you can in the back of your truck bed. If you can't, consider using an extension lead just to make things a little bit easier. Alright guys, I really hope you enjoyed this week's episode. You've been able to get some valuable lessons that you can take away and use on your next truck camping adventure. If you're interested in the full setup that I've got, as well as the gear that I use, I'll link that video, as well as how to stay warm whilst winter truck camping, to the end of this one. I'll also link any gear that I've mentioned in this video in the description. Thanks very much for watching. I'll catch you on the next one. Cheers guys.